Well, what's interesting about this panel, we're going to start with the football thing and talk about the future of football and working within the context of a cooperative movement as well, which I think is really great. You've done a lot of work in this before. This is not a new idea. So I guess let's talk about the work you've done with this before, because I remember on that tour we did years ago, the Hillsborough tour.
Yes,
when you talk about them, that was around about that time, wasn't it?
Absolutely,
It's about giving
John.
the fans the control over football again.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was saying earlier today, 20 years ago, just over actually, we set up Supporters Direct. And it was at a time when obviously people were moving into clubs in the lower divisions, dodgy intentions, assets being stripped. And it was a movement that we built, and it grew really quickly. I think looking back, maybe it didn't have enough kind of weight behind it, with government funding, councils, but still it made a massive difference. And yet, I always kind of felt maybe that the idea of supporter ownership was still something that a certain group of fans kind of felt passionately about, but the wider fan base was a bit like more sceptical. Then you bring it right up to date, bang up to date, European Super League. 50+1 became a kind of call, didn't it, that everyone was buying into, the whole, because everyone could then feel it and see it then, that their club was at risk of this, just being kind of ripped out of its community, ripped out of its league, lose its ground. No club's safe. We've got Oldham athletic supporters with us today. Everyone feels for them in the situation that they're in, but it could be any of us. My club nearly got relegated this year. What would have happened then with all of that? So I think finally the pennies dropped with everybody that clubs are not safe in the current structure of football, and therefore what makes clubs safe? Supporter community ownership. That's the only thing that really guarantees the long-term future of your club. And I think the idea has been building over the last 20 years, but it's definitely an idea whose time now has fully come.
I mean, Andy, is he here? No. Yes. Hello, Andy. I mean, you're an example of this, aren't you, as somebody who's actually built a club up from the fan support, from the grassroots.
Oh.
When the Glazers came and took over at Manchester United, there were thousands of people who said that they weren't going to support the Glazers business model, and a number of people then went to sell FC United, which I was a reluctant convert to at first, but I was the general manager for 11 years, and we built crowds to over 3,000, over 5,000 members. There's certainly the appetite there amongst football fans in Manchester, and I'm currently working with Bury fans in rescuing their club after the demise there as well. We've got over 40 clubs now across the country at all levels who are fully or majority owned by their supporters. So the movement is growing. It does need support from policymakers and from people within the game, because supporters provide the stability that Andy just talked about there. The launch of Supporters Direct 20 years ago, it was a new concept. Cooperatives and mutuals weren't new, but in football it was, and that consciousness and awareness of football fans of what was possible is greater now than it was then. Andy talks about the 50+1 rule. I remember when in 98-99, when we were arguing against the Rupert Murdoch takeover of Manchester United, we were in conversations with Barcelona, and Joan Laporta, who was then a leader of the supporters pressure group, Elefante Blau, approached us and asked us for support for what they were doing. And whilst Joan's tenure as president of Barcelona has not been what we would recognise as a sort of standard supporter ownership model, it did show what could be done by supporters with a proper campaign to actually have an influence over their football club.
I mean, do you see it as a model that works in a more grassroots end of football? I mean, you talk about Barcelona there, which is obviously the other end of football. Or do you see it as a future model for all football clubs?
Certainly. In football terms, managers come and go, players come and go, owners come and go, but supporters don't. Supporters are there for the long term, and the supporters are there putting money in week after week, and for nothing more than the support for their community and their football club. Football is the biggest expression of community identity that this country has.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at the way that loyalty to the club is exploited by bad actors in the game, those bad actors morph year on year into different interventions in the game. At the moment, we've got crypto as a threat to football. You know, at a time when crypto has lost a third of its, or 70% I should say, it's only at a third of its value that it was last autumn. Crypto is now moving into football because that's an area where they see being able to exploit their advantage with the cash that they've got. So I think it's further up the leagues, clubs and leagues themselves, or football authorities, need to involve fans, because fans are not just cannon fodder, they're the people who provide stability to the game.
I mean, these are very much core values of the cooperative movement as well, aren't they? So this is why this is a really interesting topic. It's kind of populist topic, but also kind of chimes with the core values of this kind of Congress as well, aren't they? And is that something you're really interested in as well?
Most definitely. I think Supporters Direct is now merged with the Football Supporters Federation, and we are now the Football Supporters Association. And all those supporter-owned clubs and those supporter trusts, over 100 trusts across the professional game, where many of them have a stake in their football club. What we need now is a review of the policy framework and the legislation framework to ensure that the rights of fans are embedded within the ownership and governance of their football clubs. And that's why we're really excited by the conversation we've been having with Andy over the last few weeks about looking at the new political framework we have with the combined authorities and the powers that they have. What can they do? What can politicians like Andy and others do to support activists in their community who are looking for mutual ownership of their club, or just having a stake in their club? And ownership brings with it not just a recognition from the majority owners of the club, but also it gives supporters participation rights and empowers those supporters in terms of their own engagement with the club and what they can actually do, the participation and their ownership of the club, the ownership of the club brings.
I mean, yeah, you're saying what politicians like you do. You know.
Well, I've got massive respect for Andy and everything that he's done to promote supporter ownership of football, from the days campaigning against the Glazer takeover and everything since. And it's just brilliant for me to know that what Supporters Direct built all those years ago is now in his hands, as part of the Football Supporters Association. So learning from what we've all been through, the kind of thought in my mind was, well, how do we give him more backing when he's talking to Oldham or whoever about taking a stake? Because we often do get, with Bury it was too late. It was when we were asked to get involved, the thing was too far gone. So what we've got to do is create a support system that is actually an evolution of what we were doing with Supporters Direct. So this is the task force that we're announcing today. Greater Manchester Combined Authority, Cooperatives UK, Football Supporters Association, a tripartite agreement saying we're going to create a support system behind supporters who are trying to take control of their club. And obviously Oldham Athletic are the club, this spotlight moves around, doesn't it? And now it's on Oldham. And we want to prove, hopefully, this new concept with Oldham to say we're going to stand behind them. We're not dictating anything, by the way. It's the supporters are deciding what they want to do and how they want to do it. But we're just the enablers behind them. And these three organisations now, between us, we have some considerable heft between us to sort of back them up. And, it's for the long term. It's not like a quick fix or, we're just saying we're going to be there. It's not a fair weather thing. We'll be behind you. And then if it works for Oldham, maybe other clubs will step forward and ask for the same support. So that's what we're announcing, John. It's the mayoral combined authority, if you like, providing the government side of things, and obviously Co-ops UK and FSA doing the sort of direct frontline work.
So it's basically providing a structure and maybe advice, or is there actually more practical things you can do? I mean, how do you take over a football club if you're fans? I mean, how can these two guys take over Oldham Athletic from a dodgy owner?
Well, it's a community benefit society, isn't it? Approach, possibly, a community share offer. And I think Andy's working on those kind of things anyway with the supporters. I mean, it's for Oldham supporters to talk about the detail, but here there's a kind of issue about the ground being in different ownership, and that might present a good first step, if you like, to secure the club, something that wasn't open to Bury fans. So it's about all of those things. Every club situation will throw up different complexity, but it's about having the three partners standing behind to unlock that with the supporters. And the thing about a democratic organisation, a not-for-profit organisation, it's much easier for an organisation like mine to become an investor in community football than it is if it's, a direct, a kind of company that is a bit shady and all. And that's why it can give confidence to the public sector to support, particularly if we look at Boundary Park. I mean, I just put this thought out there, but it could be more than a football stadium, couldn't it? It's got the space around it to be a community cooperative hub, actually, with football at its heart, but that building out the identity of the Oldham community, as Andy said. In this day and age, what else speaks to the identity of places more than the football club? It does nothing, actually. And if Oldham Athletic was lost, it would be a catastrophe for the town and the borough of Oldham, a catastrophe, and we can't let it happen.
Yeah, you're probably like my generation of people that all the towns of Britain that I'd ever heard of were football clubs when I was growing up. I wouldn't even know these places existed,
Yeah.
So
I knew all the grounds as well, did you?
I know all of them from the 70s and even backtracking.
Yeah.
But so that idea, and I've always liked that idea, the football clubs are more than just a football club. It's a community hub, but also it should be a multi, a facility place, shouldn't it, for all different types of activities.
Absolutely. And to be fair to them, I mean, we beat them up at times, but a lot of them are. I mean, everyone can have their debates about the ownership of different clubs, but you can't dispute the fact that Manchester City have invested quite a lot in East Manchester. I mean, that is just, they have. I mean, or you look at my club, Everton, what they do in the community is outstanding, actually. And it's not a fake commitment, it's a real commitment. And there's lots more examples, but what we could have, though, is more kind of permanent benefit and more supporter control, because all clubs get themselves at times into positions where they're taking decisions that go against the grain of what the supporters feel, and we've got to prevent these crises happening and put clubs on a much firmer foundation for the long run.
So the minimum would be having supporters representing on boards, and the maximum would be having the supporters actually running the club.
I've always had a little bit, I don't know what Andy thinks about it, because we had these debates 20 or so years ago on the Football Task Force. You can't have a token supporter on the board. I don't particularly favour that. Just a fan on the board and that's it. It's got to be a supporter with the backing of an ownership stake on the board to be in the room as an equal, not as a token. So I think the ownership is a really important part of it. Ownership of the core assets, the ground. That's what I think we should work to. A supporters' trust owning the ground, leasing it to the owners, and therefore the supporters, not the flimsy fit and proper persons test that the football authorities do or don't apply. Actually, in the case of Oldham, if Oldham supporters own the ground, they would be interviewing the owners who come on, because they'd have to lease the ground from them. Do you see what I mean? I mean, that is such a sort of strength of position that you can put football supporters in if they're the ones who are controlling the asset, and they are the ones interviewing the prospective owners, and then football will have its kind of its fundamentals in the right place.
Interesting, because that chimes to the Music Venue Trust campaign for the music venues to actually own the venues as well, isn't it? So it's the powers in the bricks in a sense.
Absolutely. I was just talking about music venues, critical national infrastructure I called it, but I would say the same about football grounds across the country and everything that goes on inside them, around them. These are incredible places, aren't they, of community, of togetherness, of debate sometimes, but these are places that bind us together, bind communities together. Times when you've got very divisive politics going around towns, the football club is the one place where people coalesce and kind of look outwards a bit, and you just can't lose that. You can't sort of have it hanging on the whim of some so-called saviour who's going to come in from where, God knows where. We're gambling with these clubs every time they're sold. There's a massive gamble with a proud English name of a proud football club. And it's kind of like, it's high stakes, isn't it? And we've got to take that out of it. And, I just take my hat off to Andy and the work he does. He does painstaking work, because it is painstaking work. It's not easy. But, I think with this partnership today, maybe we can put some more power behind his elbow and, get more progress.
I mean, just as a aside, but another one to look out for is Derby County. I heard they might only have 2 weeks left.
Well, I don't know if Elaine is here today, because Elaine is heavily involved. I think she's heard enough from me. She's gone off to another meeting. But Andy, do you know something about the Derby County situation? Because I think it is pretty critical, isn't it? Liquidation is even being mentioned, isn't it?
It is critical, and I'm not closely involved in the Derby County situation. My colleague is working with that. But again, at Derby, one of the biggest issues we have is supporters' understanding of the issues, and that it's not so much an education piece, because people know what the issues are. It's about supporters understanding what their power is and what the influence they can bring, and the situation at Derby would be much better if it was followed what Andy was saying there about the asset being in the ownership of the community. Just picking up a point you made there, John, about other examples at Bury. The last 2 owners who came into the club gambled with the club's assets that have been built up over generations. This isn't, they come in and buy a club for a small amount because the club's in distress, but they recognise, these new owners, they recognise the value in the bricks and mortar, to the extent that they then leverage them for borrowing to bring money in for revenue, and that shouldn't be allowed. They shouldn't be allowed to leverage the assets that have been built up over generations, that have also been built up not just by football fans, but the local community and the taxpayer, who've given tax breaks through council tax relief or through HMRC relief, football itself generally through grants. That's not there to be exploited by private capital. That's there as community wealth that's been put in by the broader community, not just those football fans. So there's an undeniable argument that these assets should be in the hands of the community. And a bit of a warning here to other clubs as well. Oldham are the first club from the Premier League era to crash out of the professional game into non-league. Mm-hmm. And that's a club that traditionally can command crowds in excess of Premiership clubs, virtually half the Championship clubs. It's a warning to the likes of Burnley, who've gone down the route of high stakes, private capital investment on the basis they're going to stay in the Premier League. It's the casino economy on coke. It's madness, and you need politicians and policymakers to protect those assets from exploitation of private capital.
And Andy, I hope you do everything you can for Oldham, but don't let them bring back that plastic pitch.
They did all right with the plastic pitch, though.
We've got some Oldham fans as well. It'd be good. I don't know if
Yeah, we've got the mic here. Yes. Yeah, so whereabouts are you up to? Whereabouts up to in the campaign? Are you?
Sorry. Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Paul Whitehead from the Oldham Athletic Sports Foundation. With me is Dom Lowe, who's also from the foundation. We're at a fairly early stage, I think, John. We've had meetings over the last couple of weeks with Andy and Rose, and we're beginning the process now. Andy Burnham alluded to the club. It's in a difficult position, there's no doubt about it. We have just dropped out of the Football League after 115 years of membership. The club is owned by an absent owner who hasn't been in the country for months. The ground is in separate ownership. We are engaging somewhat with the owners of the ground with a view to seeing what we can do about that. And we are looking to convert to a community benefit society over the next 6 to 8 weeks, ideally, if we can get a move on, and then look towards a community share offer, which will give us a sizable amount of money, hopefully, which we can then invest, ideally in the stadium, to do, again, the things that Andy Burnham talked about, which is make it a community hub again, reach out to all sections of the community. And I think Oldham have probably failed in that in the past. And we see some of the work that Blackburn are doing with some of the ethnic communities in Blackburn. and Oldham has a similar population. We need to do more there. We'd like to win a few games. We haven't done that for a very long time. I'm not sure Dom's ever seen us win more than half a dozen games a season. But yeah, so we are at an early stage. We thank both Andy's and Rose from Co-ops UK for their invaluable support over the last few weeks, and we hope to make significant progress over the next couple of months to help us build a stake to bring the club back into local ownership for local people.
Good. I mean, are you working with... Are you working with other clubs at all?
So we've had a lot of support from across the football community. I mean, just a recent example, the club announced a friendly with Bolton Wanderers. Bolton fans came out in their droves and said our club should not be supporting their owner, and they managed to get their club, who listens to their fans, to call off that game. So we're not playing that game with them anymore, which puts that pressure, that public pressure, back and puts our owner in the spotlight. And we've had that support from across the country, not just locally. We've had Leyton Orient fans collecting outside Wembley for us, the FA Cup, and you know, with their help and with the help of other football fans, Oldham fans, but other football fans as well, we've already raised in donations over £50,000.
What about other fan groups? Because I'm a Blackpool fan, and we were stuck with probably the dodgiest owner of the whole lot. But we found that Liverpool were very good, Spirit of Shankly, lots of great advice, lots of other people. What scares these owners more than anything is actually when the cooperative goes on beyond just the fans of one club being cooperative, but all the clubs. It scares them.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, Christine said, and the rest of the Blackpool Supporters Trust, they've been probably our number one supporter, alongside...
It was 6 easy points for us, but...
I live in Blackpool, John, so I know.
But the solidarity between the fans is what scares them, isn't it? Which is a core to probably a lot of the co-op ideas across, not outside football as well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've been, this past season, Oldham fans have been protesting. Right there next to us, Leyton Orient fans, other football fans. We recognise the issues that other clubs are having, like Derby, like Bury have in the past, like Rochdale have had recently as well, with hostile takeovers being mooted. We're here to stand shoulder to shoulder with every other football fan who has issues. We're all different and complex, but we're there to support each other, whether that's financially or emotionally, or getting out on our feet and protesting or standing next to each other. Yeah, definitely.
I mean, obviously you've been speaking to Andy, haven't you? And yeah, so I mean, what advice have you been giving these guys about what they need to do? And I guess on other clubs as well, I guess it's different for every club, different situations, different types of clubs, different types of owners. But is there a general thing that fans could do? Is it just basically just organise and agitate, or is there more that people can do?
I think I'd take my hat off to the Oldham fans for the way that they've responded in not just expressing their opposition to the way the club has been managed over 20 years, really, not just the last 4 or 5 years of Lansdowne, but they've held together. You know, people have held together as a group. They've not all been going to games because they don't want to give the current owners the money, but they've held together as a group. And in that period of turmoil, football's no different than anything else. Splinters develop between the supporters of the club, and what we've seen over the last few months as fans recognising that despite the differences that they've had in the past over things that have been said or not said or done or not done, that they need to have that solidarity that Dom talked about there. And the discussions we've been having the last few weeks about coming together behind a community benefit society with the opportunity of raising community shares is one of those elements which the cooperative movement has provided football that wasn't there 10, 15 years ago. I was involved with FC United in the first pilot scheme of community shares, and we raised in excess of £2 million for building the ground in North Manchester. And alongside that, the fans then put in another £1 million in terms of donations. And when football fans put that kind of cash in, the business community and other grant givers and the local authority can say, okay, you've made a commitment, we'll back you. And that's the message that we've been discussing with Paul and Don over the course of the last few weeks, is that if we can come together, despite all those past differences, this is something a bit bigger now. This is about what we can all do together with the court movement, with the likes of Andy's office and GMCA, to get some real cash together. We're already talking to the local business community about them coming in and supporting this as well, for a future for the club. And start then to have some conversations with the owner and say, look, you know, bygones be bygones. The club is now in a desperate situation. Its lowest point, as Paul said, for over 100 years. What are we going to do? If you really care about this club, what are we going to do together? And then let's have a fresh challenge. And that money is very achievable. If we can raise £2 million quid at FC United with a fan base of 4,000 or 5,000, Oldham can reach out to 20,000 people. So the amount of money that they possibly could raise really is the sky's the limit.
I guess it's a fast learning curve for you guys, because basically you're just fans. You just want to go and watch football, don't you? But now you've got to work out how to take over a club and run it. But I mean, do you have a plan of action apart from an emotional response to the situation, or is there like a manifesto or a plan, or?
There is a plan that we're working on internally for the future of football club and what we want it to look like, and that is focused on the team, the academy, because young players are always going to be important for clubs like ours, the facilities, the stadium we've already touched on, and the community. And those are the four sort of planks of our business plan moving forward. Because of the fractured relationship with the owner, the one thing we haven't been able to do a great deal about at the moment is put some finances into that business plan, because we've no idea what's going on with the finances of the club as it stands. We've got statutory accounts, but the small company accounts tell you virtually nothing. So that is the one thing that's missing from our plans at the moment, but we've certainly got a plan for all those other elements that we want to bring together for the good of the town, the club and the community.
I mean, Andy, do you think, I mean, this has been bumping up for years, and it's not just Oldham, we talked about this before, there's been other clubs, other situations, campaigns that you started before, organisations you started before. Do you think this is finally the turning point we're getting to?
I do. I feel it is, and I think the European Super League really was that sort of moment where everyone went, you know what, the game can't be run like this anymore. And everyone did come together at that moment, so much so that there is legislation on football arriving in the Commons fairly soon, a regulator, not before time. But that's an opportunity, isn't it, that legislation, to amend it, to expand it, to pick up some of the points that Andy was talking about before, John. So no, I think we finally have hit the point where the argument is won. Clubs should be, if not wholly owned by supporters, certainly supporters should be a major investor in clubs. I think in legislation we should have a 50+1 rule. Well, we should be building to 50+1 in ownership. That's where we should be going as a country, I think, so that clubs are majority owned by supporters on that German model. That can't be done overnight. But what I think you could have is a 50+1 rule over fundamental decisions affecting the future of the club, not being, by law, having to have 50+1 of the season ticket holders. So that you've got to stop these things building over time, haven't you? They kind of, you know, I mean, Elaine's here now, and I don't know whether she wants to say anything about Derby, but the trouble is, decisions get made in boardrooms that are going to explode on the fans 2 years down the line, and I think you've got to get to a situation where we stop that happening, and there's a statutory requirement to have a majority of season ticket holders support when any fundamental change is being made to the ground, the league they play in, the colours they play in, anything like that. So change is coming, John, yeah, and that bill in Parliament, the co-op movement is going to have to make I think we need a big campaign around that legislation when it comes to make sure we get the maximum benefit for football supporters from it.
So do we have to wait for when Labour win the next election for this, or is it?
Well, I think, to be fair, Tracy Crouch, who was the former sports minister, and I like Tracy, you know, and she did a good job with her fan-led review. I think most people would probably agree with that. What you want to see is that fan-led review coming into the legislation. Andy, do you agree with that?
I think Tracy did do a very good job. I think one of the best reports that we've seen, but with the current state of Parliament and the economic situation, we've still got to maintain the pressure that legislation is brought to the House and is actually passed. And then there's a battle, as Andy indicated there, about what the regulator actually does. And as an organisation, we're working with the football authorities. You know, we're talking to the FA, the Football League and the Premier League about how the fan-led review will be implemented already. The Premier League have responded with talking to us about a new supporter engagement model. It's not ownership, but it's a supporter engagement model. They've recognised that fan-led review is talking about golden shares and about giving some protection to the game's key heritage assets.
Andy, is it realistic, Andy, to have leverage buyouts on the kind of basis of Manchester United and Burnley made illegal?
I would hope so, but I would also say it was Richard Caborn who turned us down at Manchester United. So we've got when we lobbied the then Labour government to stop the Glazer takeover, Richard Caborn batted it back over the net and said he was quite happy with what was going on with the Glazers. And I think that was really is because the strength of the supporter movement then wasn't what it is now. You know, Paul talked very eloquently before about the solidarity that they've received from supporter groups. That's not organised by us as the FSA. That's just fan groups recognising common purpose and common aims and coming to the aid of other supporters. That wasn't around in 98, 99 when we were fighting the Glazers. It is now because more and more supporters are facing that, and that puts pressure on all politicians. And I would call on, you know, the political arm of the co-op movement, the co-op party, to work with us to help develop policy that then supports those well-meaning individuals from whichever party they're from who want to see real change to cement the football community in the heart of the game and give fans a real voice.
Okay, so Derby County then.
Yes, Derby County find themselves in a rather a mess at the moment. And having extricated ourselves back in 2005 from previous owners, we formed a trust in 2002. And then we had previous owners that were really bad. They were actually sent to prison. And we thought everything was fine. And then we got a local owner, multi-millionaire owner, and we thought everything would be fine. It didn't turn out to be fine at all. He's taken out loans. He's done all sorts of weird financial dealings, ending up with us being deducted 21 points this season and relegated to League One. And we are now in the position that the fixtures are out Monday, and we don't have an owner. We are in administration, facing liquidation, and there is nothing that the fans can do about it. The trust are taking taking them to task and trying to hold their sort of feet to the flames. But we're not getting very far because there's not a lot you can do when the administrators don't seem to be talking to some of the people who are trying to buy the club. So one of those people has now taken out a lawsuit. So this is all dragging it on longer and longer and longer. And we don't know if we'll have a club next week.
So they basically just paralyse it in the courts to stop you taking control. Is that what they're doing?
Yes. Well, there's no way that the trust can take on a club the size of Derby County with possibility of debts up to or more than £50 million. There's just no way that you can take on that sort of thing, and that's how it's built up. Plus, the owner sold himself the stadium. So he owns the stadium, which is not in administration, whereas the club is. So they're two separate entities. It's the biggest muddle I think I've ever heard of. And it's something we are fighting for, and it's something we're desperately trying to sort out and trying to take advice. But there just doesn't seem to be anything that the ordinary supporter can do. We have gates regularly, 30,000 people. So a club that size going down the pan.
Yeah, that's a start. If you've got 30,000 people, that's an army, isn't it? So it's...
It is, yeah. And hearing what was saying earlier about fans turning on one another, that does happen as well when you find yourself in adversity, that splinter groups set up and people saying, what's the trust doing? What's the trust doing? They're no use, they're this, they're that. All they want's a seat on the board, and it's just not true. But we have actually, yesterday, managed to get a letter sent to the administrators and the EFA, which has been agreed by all the 5 main supporter groups and signed by all of us. So we're hoping that has some action. But I was very grateful. I don't know if is Ian Adderley here? He gave me some very good advice over the weekend about how you can approach the business secretary, who has the power to intervene with administrators. I didn't know that. So that's something we'll probably be, I mentioned it to Andy last night, it's something we'll probably be doing in the next day or so.
Something important there, though, Elaine, about administrators, isn't there? Because, you know, they supposedly come in.
They were appointed by the former owner.
Yeah.
And I understand they're the ones they had at Portsmouth.
Yeah.
They don't seem to be administrating very much.
Who regulates
No.
the administrator?
And they've run up £3 million worth of costs that they want to be paid.
Yeah.
So, I mean, would you have advice in that situation, Andy? I mean, it's obviously not up to you to save the club, but...
I just remember with Wigan, because they were in this position, you know, you think administration can bring you a whole new range of issues, you know, and that's, you know, well, Derby obviously looking down that barrel a little bit at the moment. So I think it's great that Elaine's spoken, because I think we need, obviously we're rallying around Oldham today. I do think we do need to rally around the Rams Trust as well at the moment, because, you know, it's a pretty dire situation for them.
I think, John, if I may just say there about administrators, they are one of the problems. The administrators are, you know, to use another analogy, they're the people who are sitting there looking after the financial collapse of a club. The first people they pay are themselves, and they take sometimes quite extortionate fees. We saw that at Bury as well, where the administrator there is always going to look after themselves, and the lack of regulation, let alone legislation covering administrators, is a real problem. We've made complaints directly to the regulators of insolvency and recovery specialists, and they've been batted away. And you know, you look at some, not going into the details here, but you look into some of the antics that the administrators made at Derby County. It's a scandal. They've laid more debt on the football club than was there when they took over, and they will take their fees out of that. It's very, very loose legislation, because these people traditionally are looking after companies that are in collapse. They're looking to try and salvage something for the creditors, and there's a load of bottom feeders around, like the likes of Steve Dale, who took over at Bury, know that, and they use that again for personal private gain at the expense of the wider community. It's an absolute disgrace.
So, okay, so part of what we talk about here is we're doing the football, but also extrapolating these ideas out. Because I think with football, you can actually see how dodgy the owners of most big business are. They're often psychopaths, they're often greedy. Cooperative movement to bring things up from the grassroots is something I've always really believed in and really loved and things. So, and you're working in a lot of different areas with the co-op thing. So we've got the Carbon Co-op in Manchester, Co-op Commission, and also...
Carbon Co-op here, I think.
And beyond the music as well, and the music industry as well. So we've got about 10 minutes. If you could just sort of explain what your connection and what the ideas behind those are.
Yeah, I mean, these are obviously all different parts of the Greater Manchester world that matter hugely to people. We talked about care today, we talked about football, we talked about music. The big challenge of people's homes, making them affordable, warm, you know, is a massive challenge as we rise the climate challenge. And I think the co-op movement has a big role there. That, you know, the cost of living crisis actually a big role, and you know, the Carbon Co-op are brilliant actually. The thing I would say to everybody with regard to how we move from the kind of the models we've lived under, because you go through all of these things, football, music, care, the common denominator is the mantra that the market solves everything has been comprehensively disproved by the last 30 years in all of those sectors. It's left us with a nightmare, isn't it? You know, where we haven't got these things that matter so much to us in a place where they're secure. And so therefore, you know, tackling the status quo this session is, I think we have to really start to sort of talk about an entirely new sort of approach to things. Devolution of power out of Westminster empowers the cooperative movement. I think everyone really needs to get behind this notion, because it is about then power flowing the other way, the way it's traditionally flown in this country, where Westminster, subject to the lobbying of big business, privatisation, deregulation, that's what that system has delivered, isn't it? And it has, on the ground, it's caused chaos. It's caused a situation where homes are not safe for people. The cladding crisis killed people. Grenfell, 5 years this week. It's created a situation where buses are unaffordable to people. You've got a deregulated bus system. And I think this is the change that we now need. We need to kind of absolutely rule out this notion that the market solves everything. It doesn't.
We've ended up with a Derby County economy.
We are a Derby County economy, in all respect to Elaine, but
Yeah.
that's not a great statement right now.
But devolving not just to the regions, but devolving to the people, devolving to the people in this room, getting together to make things work. And
That's the point. I mean, you know, it's to be proven yet whether this thing we're announcing today will work. But I am trying to get some of the devolved power I have behind Oldham Athletic. That's what we're trying to do. Not to take over not to tell them what to do, but then just to stand behind them. That's the point of what devolved power and funding can do. And I have come to the view that we need just wholesale change, don't we, in terms of the way these things are being done. Energy would be another one, wouldn't it? You know, put energy systems in the hands of local people so that they can protect themselves from the profiteering that goes on and the kind of the anxiety that's caused by rising energy prices. These are the things that we need to do going forward. And you know, the co-op movement obviously has. We can often say its time has come, but I think post-pandemic, its time has really, really come. And we can't sit back and wait. You've got to shape the future now ourselves. And I would say that the mayoral combined authorities and the cooperative community in every area is a potent combination if we can get them absolutely aligned and pushing in the same direction.
For me, it's a 19th century industrial revolution idea that makes more sense in the 21st century. This is the time for the co-op movement, isn't it?
Yeah, but let's just be honest, though. I think I am talking about wholesale political reform because the country is hardwired to favour vested interests against the wider public interest. And that is my experience of 16 years in Westminster. You concentrate power in a small number of hands in Westminster, you create the opportunity for the media to manipulate that power in the interests of big vested interests, the status quo. And this is what this session is about. So I think we need to rewire the country, basically, if you're to get power out of there and into the hands of people who are able then to protect what matters to them, to support people with their homes and their energy bills. So, you know, I am in some ways a bit of a late convert to this, but I am now fully in favour of proportional representation for the Commons. I think the Lords should become a Senate of the nations and regions, and out of that reformed Parliament, I think you have to have maximum devolution of power to all parts of the country and resources, so that communities can rebuild their own worlds, their own places. You know, why do we put up any more with anonymous care companies extracting money out of care commissioning, as we were hearing before, and leaving vulnerable people within our communities without the basic support? Why are we putting up with that model anymore? You know, and I think you've got to rewire the country, I think, to allow a different model to take shape. We're kind of nibbling at it at the moment, but I think you've got to take a decisive step. Power's got to flow differently around the country, and the more that power flows out of Westminster and into local communities, the more you empower supporters' trust at the grassroots level, or care co-ops, or carbon co-ops. And I think we're going to hear from the carbon co-op.
The context of that, which really tees up very nicely to what the carbon co-op's doing, I think.
Yeah, I think there's a few things there, and I think the overall message is how well cooperatives can play with the devolved local authorities. And I'll give you one example. The cost of living crisis at the moment, everyone's fuel bills are going through the roof. Okay, fantastic. We need to do something about that. What's the response from government? Well, it's to give tax breaks to oil companies in the North Sea. It's to...
And also deregulation.
Yeah.
No, they were saying, let's have a deregulation drive to solve the cost of living crisis.
Yeah. What's the one thing we know that will reduce people's bills forever? It's insulating their homes, retrofitting their homes. And the BEIS, the Business Secretary, the Treasury are just silent on it. They don't want to say anything about it. We can speculate why that is. But then we have people like Andy at a local level who are putting it out there and saying, no, we need to do this. We need to retrofit homes. It's for the good of the people. It builds local supply chains, local economies. It tackles the environment as well. And that political leadership is just absolutely absent at the national scale from Westminster at the moment. And as cooperatives, working at a local level, building these new businesses, helping people in their homes, we need that. We need that kind of leadership, because from that flows action, from that flows funding and the right kind of environment and the regulatory environment to do that.
Can't we just do it without them? You know, let's just do it all grassroots.
I think that's one of the messages of cooperatives. Like, we are doing that. You know, Carbon Corp been going for more than 10 years now, and we're doing stuff all over Greater Manchester and beyond. But to achieve that kind of scale that we know is necessary, there are 1.2 million homes in Greater Manchester. The vast majority of them need some kind of intervention, some of them quite major, really. Yeah. We're never going to achieve that on our own, but we can by working with combined authorities, by working with other people who are out there, working together in cooperation.
So in context of the cooperative movements, how good is that for the zero carbon and those kind of futures? Do the two tally? Does it make that your job, your work easier?
In terms of like
in the cooperative movement, and I mean, is that something that facilitates it, makes it easier, gets the message out, people get organised?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we know is like the kind of changes we're going to make to our homes and to our communities and energy systems, they're going to need quite big changes. They're going to be different ways in which we use energy and what have you. We need that consent and that legitimacy to make those changes. We need the involvement of people in that process. I think it is very similar to football clubs. It can't be a thing of like, we've talked to people, we've consulted them and they're happy with it. They have to be involved. Yeah. They have to be involved in the ownership and the control of these kind of systems. Retrofit is something we do a lot of, yeah. We're going to go into people's homes. We can make some quite large-scale changes. It might cost quite a bit of money to do that sort of thing. Now, the householders need to trust us. They need to think, all right, yeah, I trust these guys to come in and do stuff. And the fact that we're not for profit, but that we're owned by members and that our members are the people that we're working for, that's integral to that. And that's why we're doing retrofit at the moment when quite a lot of the private sector, they're not doing anything, you know.
I think this is the thing I was just trying to get over before, you know. Co-ops thrive in a crisis, don't they? And we're in a national crisis, cost of living, but climate, energy, there's on all fronts, isn't it, at the moment? Things are collapsing, aren't they? Things are breaking down in front of us, leaving people exposed to costs that they can't afford, and so we're in a crisis. So that's why I say it's the moment for the cooperative movement, because you could solve the crisis by more of the same, and the government will try and do that. But actually, it's the crisis and the climate imperative combined to say something fundamentally different is needed than what we've done before, because we're not going to get the fairness into this. Actually, you've got to kind of think of climate justice, social justice, one and the same thing. If you're going to make homes, buildings, transport, energy systems green, it's a chance to change them, but to change them in the public benefit, not in the again replicating the issues that we've had. So do you see what I mean? I mean, this is why this is such a moment actually to bring through a whole new paradigm really in terms of how we create wealth in communities, create good jobs through retrofitting. It's about the crisis we're in and the climate crisis coming, and then saying, right, business as usual is not going to solve either of those things. So therefore, the new thing comes in and takes its place.
This is the moment. This is the moment.
I think so. Yeah.
I think it's actually, even though everything's in a really terrible situation, there's actually a positive to take from this because we can actually get everything sorted out now.
I think so. I think I'm going to be saying more about this in the coming days, but I think we need a big change of direction for the country now in this period that we're in. We cannot carry on the same path of doing the same things. And while the government I was in did lots of good things, I am sad that it kind of continued the sort of deregulation, sort of the competitive tendering that we were talking about before, and the fragmentation of public services. It shouldn't, it did many good things, and I'm proud of many things it did, but actually it kind of carried a direction on that was going through the 80s, 90s, and I think we've hit a point here where the evidence is absolutely right there in front of us. Deregulation does not work. Privatisation of public services does not work. If you leave the private sector in control of homes and retrofitting, it won't happen at the speed that we need for the climate crisis. You won't get public transport that people can afford. Look at the cost of trains, what people have paid to get here today, cost of buses. It's not working for people. It's damaging people's lives. So a whole new model is needed. And I don't know, whether that's too ambitious, but it feels to me that, we need to get a kind of new consensus around this, that it can't be more of the same.
Well, go on.
It can't be more of the same. Well, that's why I'm putting these ideas out there. It can't be more of the same.
Yeah. You were saying?
Yeah, well, the government are currently consulting on how we use and manage our energy systems in the future to be more flexible, to allow more generation on them. And they're saying, okay, we're going to create a market. How do you think our market should be run? And the obvious response is, look at the energy supply market. It's not working. Dozens of companies have gone bust. Companies that came into the market to make a quick buck and found out, well, they couldn't when things changed. And then also the same with energy efficiency. Energy companies are mandated to spend a portion of the money that they earn on energy efficiency. Now, they've dropped off the cliff. That market isn't working. Those markets aren't working. So for the regulators and for the government to say, well, what new market should we come up with? It's just fantasy.
To me, I think we've not processed enough yet what we've all lived through in the last 2 years. What we saw laid bare when the tide went out in March 2020. We could see the seabed of this country more clearly than we'd ever seen it before, couldn't we? And what we saw was millions of people in jobs so insecure that when they were ill, they couldn't go home. And hence, COVID took a hold in some of the the least affluent parts of our country. And they were going home to homes in the private rented sector that were not fit for human habitation, that were damaging to their health. That is what it revealed. That is where we've got to with the way we've been running things. That model of leaving people working hour to hour to try and make things work with no security in their life whatsoever, worrying themselves to sleep every night in a home that's beneath a decent home standard because the landlord's under barely any regulatory pressure to maintain the condition of their property. That is the state of things.
And having no power.
And the pandemic revealed it, and what are we going to do about it?
And having no power of their lives, which I find the co-op thing is great because it empowers people to take responsibility for their own lives.
It takes power off politicians, which is great, and I fully advocate that, having worked with a lot of them over the years.